Wonderful. Well, I'm so excited to be here because the last time I was at the Excel Center, there was this massive conference called Sibos. Anybody know what Sibos is? It's this massive conference around like the future of finance and tech. I don't think I've ever seen that many blue suits in one concentrated area. And now I feel like I'm a little bit more in my element because I'm a designer. Now, how many of you are all designers? Yeah, this is my crew, and it feels so good. So this makes me really happy to be here because as a designer, you know, my whole focus in my career has been to create moments of joy and impact into people's lives. And what I want to talk about today is how strange it is that some of the best experiences in my career have been in places that are design unfriendly. So I know the right and left hemispheres. If you're a neuroscientist, you'd say, you know, this is a little bit bollocks and not quite exactly how it works. But for the first 7 years of my career, I worked in creative agencies. I worked in places that were hired to do design work and go deep into the human-centered experience. I don't know if you guys recognize that logo. This was like, I worked at this little company called Studio Archetype, which was acquired by Sapient. And this is me in my 20s when I was just kind of in the zone of getting creative. How many of you work in highly creative, design-friendly environments where, you know, you feel at home? Raise your hand if you're in a design-friendly environment. Okay, very good. Now, raise your hand if you're in like hostile territory. Engineering cultures, business cultures who don't get you. You have to fight for your right every day, yeah? Okay, a little bit of both. So I made my transition to the dark side when my wife and I had our first child. So this is us, 24 years old. I think you can tell by the look on my face that I was just like not quite ready for that stage of life yet. And I started thinking like, you know, it's been pretty awesome being on the client side and doing all this, you know, fast-paced learning, but I kind of want something more stable. So I remember I went to a conference. I was speaking about designing for user experiences. I was from some of my agency work. And I remember after my talk, this design manager from Microsoft popped over and said, hey, we're hiring. Do you want to come to Microsoft? And in all seriousness, I said, do you have designers at Microsoft? Because when I use your software, it's not clear that anybody who cares about people is a part of your team. And they said, yeah, we know that. But we're trying to have a revolution in bringing design to the table of what we know as an engineering culture. So my first project, I joined the MSN team, was to take this version of Hotmail. Anybody still have a Hotmail address? Anybody? Oh my God. How do you face the embarrassment? Anyone have AOL email addresses? Yeah, okay. That's super embarrassing. So my first design project was to turn this into this. So to take Hotmail from its early days into kind of a more agile, Ajax-style kind of web software experience. And I started getting excited about design at Microsoft. I actually ended up going to an innovation team working on this PC, a collaboration with Dell, where I was the interaction design lead. This was when Vista launched. We wanted to create hardware that married beautifully with the Vista design language and glass and all of that. And then I got involved in this emerging markets project where we designed essentially what is kind of a very low-cost iPad Pro. This was in 2005. So this was 5 years before the iPad actually first shipped, which Microsoft didn't really ship because they're not quite a hardware company. And this was like, I started to feel a little bit of depression at that moment. And then I was the interaction manager for this thing. Do you guys know what this is? Well, it's the names on the slide. This is the original Microsoft Surface before it became a tiny little tablet. It was a big-ass table with infrared cameras, and we were trying to figure out how to let people interact with this with just touch and objects. And Ballmer canceled this version of the project to focus on competition with Apple. And I thought it was a travesty because this was one place where Microsoft was ahead before anyone else. So I ended up at Google eventually, and I designed this thing called Project ARA. This is like if a smartphone had a love child with Lego. This would be the baby, where anybody can create a piece of this story, and the rigidness of hardware can start to open up in an ecosystem of innovation. And then, a couple years after I had left Google, the executive that I was working for, she went to Facebook, and ultimately the new senior vice president of hardware at Google canceled this project because it just wasn't one of the top priorities. And I remember wandering the streets of Palo Alto in tears and depression and chain smoking and just like feeling that the last several years of my career had just been squandered. Like, why did I put all this energy into something that never made it? Also, my then 17-year-old was, our first child was about to leave school, and he'll come back into the story in a minute. And I was traveling a lot, actually, with that project. And so I actually wanted to spend his last 18 months when he was with us before going off to university with him. So I just said, you know what, screw it. I'm gonna completely change my focus. I'm only gonna work at a place in the Bay Area that's close to, where he's going to school. And I'm gonna work for a company that has no vision. A company that's not thinking about the long-term future. A company that's working like sprint to sprint, quarter to quarter. And Walmart was a perfect place to do that. And like Microsoft, Walmart's like an oxymoron with design, isn't it? Right? Walmart's not particularly known for great design. Because what I wanted to do was, I wanted to ship stuff, because I'd had the last 5 years of my career not getting stuff out. And so the question was, how do you infuse the passion and energy of innovation into the humble act of a weekly agile or design sprint? So this is what Walmart.com looked like when I joined, which, if you're like me, I did a double take because I thought it was at hellotech.com, and then I just went, oh wait, they're just selling the most valuable real estate for an ad, which they didn't actually make a ton of money on. And then there was, there's 18 navigation points in the first 75 pixels. And originally, if you see all these links in the upper right, that was originally like 2 or 3 links, like Store Finder and your account and help. And as soon as the business found that there was real estate there, it became like a unibrow. And all of a sudden, you've got weekly ads and registry and gifts. I mean, it's just a little bit nuts. And then, I don't know about you, but this main merchandising thing, the point of view, the POV, I don't know what's happening with the B and Memorial Day, and I guess there's an attempt to make that connecting, but not really the most relevant. And then it's just carousel after carousel of just indecision. So clear that there's not a point of view in design. And so we were trying to figure out how to build momentum for a new way of thinking, because really the team was pretty much copying Amazon. And there wasn't this feeling of, well, what do we stand for? So we actually learned about this story, about how Walmart was named. So Sam Walton was talking to his store assistant, Bob Bogle. And Bob was a practical man. He had to deal with all the setup and physical bits of Sam Walton's ideas. And so Sam, he was going to start his first discount store, and he had ideas for the name. And all the names were like 4 words, like Walton Supermart Discount City was like one of those names. And so he hands this notepad to Bob Bogle and says, hey, here's, what do you think, Bob? And Bob looks at this list, and in his head, he's thinking about the amount of space available. He's like, Sam, there's not a lot of space. And then he circled the wall of Walton and the Supermart. He was like, each letter costs $7. I can do the whole sign for $49. We call it Walmart, right? That's a horrible Arkansas accent. Apologies for those that are in the South. And then Sam said, all right, that's it. And actually, while you might think about Walmart as this overwhelming array of objects representing all of the consumer options out there, that the spirit of Walmart's supply chain and how it operates is really about simplicity and efficiency. So we actually created a new design language. We created a new typeface. We named it Bogle after Bob, who was our first typographer. And it was an act of reduction. And so the end result was a mobile-first, desktop-second experience that took out all of that complexity. We reduced density by over 60%. And we actually reshot thousands of images for new category pages and the home page. And if you can see here, like, this is Tide. Do you have Tide in the UK? I mean, do we have Tide in the UK? It's just like the most ordinary laundry liquid. But there's a hand, there's a human touch. And maybe that's a laundry room that you might kind of aspire to want to have, right? So we're trying to elevate ordinary things to a more, kind of a human scale. And this is the version of Walmart.com if it's not personalized. And if we know you were just your name is Meredith, and you were just shopping in women's clothing, and here your last order just shipped, and here's what's happening at your local store. The end result of this design, which also included 7 new ad types that were all personalized. We had a predictive reordering algorithm around what your shopping list might be like. And we even started creating these little curated stories, not of product categories, but of kind of human-related activities that would cut across categories. The end result of all this, first of all, was Cheerios looked awesome. Cheerios was our benchmark. We're like, can we make Cheerios look beautiful, was the question. And the other question was, could we attract retailers who previously wouldn't want to merchandise on Walmart.com, like Nike or Apple? Because they're like, it's just, Walmart's not the best environment for my brand. And our close rate with these folks like tripled, even before we launched. So we knew that like we were onto something. So after we launched, this was actually an 8-month effort, so really focused, intensive design ops, engineering and design effort. We launched, and so we actually had double the conversion rate that we had before. This project paid for itself within a matter of days. And it led to actually the highest jump in growth rates for e-commerce that Walmart had ever had, and a commensurate rise in the stock price that they had had in 10 years. I had already come to Lloyds by then and didn't actually take advantage of all that, but this was one of the most satisfying projects of my career because it shows how you can go into the heart of a design-unfriendly type of culture and apply design in a refreshingly powerful way. I'm going to wrap up by telling you one more story about an unfinished story, what we're doing at Lloyds Banking Group. And I've only been there for about 1.5 years, so maybe next year we can share a little bit more about how this story will end. But first, again, it kind of goes back to family. So my daughter on the left, she a couple years ago said, "Mom, Dad, please don't send me to American Public High School," because she had seen her 2 older brothers go through Palo Alto High School and was like, I do not want to go through what they went through. And she also got excited about this school in the Czech Republic where she's at right now. So, and I had been talking with Lloyds for a couple years actually, because I was really impressed with with Zach Mian, who's their executive in charge of transformation, and how they're using customer journeys and design. And so 14 months ago, I left Silicon Valley and came out here, and I have to say, even though I've told you that I like practicing design in places like Microsoft and Walmart, it was an extra level of emotional detachment to now say that I am a banker. That's tough. And you can see why. Look at these Google autocomplete search results for finances are. I mean, this is how the world thinks about money. Right? Like this, from a design perspective, the relationship between people and money is completely dysfunctional and broken. Why would any self-respecting designer go there, right? But I saw the opposite. I said, if design is a light, doesn't the light shine brightest in a dark room? And in order for that light to have impact, you need to have the right culture and the right values. So I remember preparing for my first interview with Antonio, the CEO. And I was reading up on the purpose of Lloyds Banking Group, and it was actually to help Britain prosper, which I was like, okay. We all have this internal emotional sensor, which I call a bullshit meter, and mine went off a little bit. I was like, really? Do you really care about that? So I remember interviewing with Antonio, and I said, so Antonio, tell me about the purpose of the mission, the vision of Lloyds Banking Group. He said, well, Daniel, this is helping Britain prosper. I was like, okay, CEO knows, mission, that's good. That's not the case in all FTSE 100 companies. And then I said, Antonio, tell me what this means to you and your team. How do you make decisions? And I was blown away by the level of passion and depth and commitment to this mission. The team had just recently trained, I think, 750,000 individuals, charities, and nonprofits in how to use digital skills. Lloyd's Digital Index, tracking the haves and the have-nots in tech, was used by the government, actually, to set policy. Lloyd's works with customers in deeply vulnerable situations. 50% of everyone in the UK will face a cancer diagnosis of some kind at some point in their life, so half of our customers face that, and we've actually partnered with Macmillan to help customers through that journey. I mean, I was kind of blown away. And I remember I went home and I was talking to my family about how excited I was, and my 20-year-old was like, Dad, you're in your ikigai, man. I was like, excuse me? He's like, your ikigai. Now, first of all, so Max he's now 20, and he's like going into analog photography in Shoreditch. He's got like a black and white photo lab. I don't know anybody more hipster than this guy. So whatever he says, I'm kind of like, he's like at the cutting edge of awesomeness. So he says, yeah, check out ikigai. So ikigai is this Japanese philosophy of happiness. And typically we work in the professional space at the intersection of what we're good at and what we get paid for. And we somehow, to be fulfilled humans, we have to find other things outside of work that are at the intersection of what we love and what the world needs, which is like our mission. And I realized that I was kind of in the middle left part, right? I was paid okay at Walmart. I love managing design. I'm pretty good at it. But helping people make good shopping decisions isn't exactly the world's most pressing problem. And when I had the chance to come over to Lloyd's, helping people connect with money in a deeper way, actually that is an important thing if you can actually have permission to do it well. So I'm in my ikigai. And let me tell you about what we've done since I've came on board. Well, first of all, you've probably seen this slide. How many times have you seen this slide today? 5, 4, 6 times? This is like the 3 factors of innovation that are core to design, strategy, and leadership. And if technology is about what's feasible and business is about what's viable, the human factor is about what's desirable or often forgot about. That Google search is a testament to how we've not quite gotten that right in financial services. And so first of all, we had to bolster what were 5 or 6 different design-related teams tucked into various parts of the organization and pull them all in. And actually of note, we actually have a 45-person systems thinking team, which is pretty unique. Of course, we have design research, we have a service design team, and we kind of pulled together this human-centered design group. I think all told, we're about 609 folks now. And we decided to reorganize around the opportunities we're creating in our customers' lives, not around our guilds. Most design teams that I've been a part of have been organized around what designers are comfortable with, like the design research team, and here's the UX team, and then here's our different guilds. So what we ended up doing was we created this guild structure. These are our 9 guilds. They range from design research, which is on the left side are guilds that are more connected to people and their lives. And we have service designers, which are great at mapping out end-to-end journeys and thinking agnostically about what channels we need to create new scenarios. Systems thinking and systems design and design strategy, that's kind of like the mapping side. And then we have design management in the middle. Conversation design is our content strategists, our writers, and all that. You guys know in the UK they have this in the Tube. They have in London, it's see it, say it, sort it. You guys have heard that? The guy who came up with that tagline works for us and is part of that team. Super interesting. We have an interaction visual design team, which together are kind of our UX capability. And then we have diviners, developer designer hybrids that do prototyping. We pulled this whole team together into a design group. This is what they look like. They're just a really creative, diverse, interesting group of folks. And this team came together and they described their purpose. They went off to the design museum and had a writer's workshop And in simply, if our mission is to help Britain prosper, this team is there to design for prosperity. But that word prosperity is a little bit wonky. Like, when's the last time you ever heard any human on the street saying, hey, bro, how's your prosperity been this week? Like, it's just weird, right? It's like ye old English, 1700s kind of thing. So we said, well, how can we make that more understandable? So to us, we said, well, prosperity is helping people and businesses and households end the day just a bit better than it started. Trying to use kind of a behavioral science and nudging kind of approach to this vague notion of prosperity. And more importantly, we started asking, how do ordinary people talk about this? So in our labs, which Martin Dowson had a hand in leading before I joined, up in Edinburgh, in London, Halifax, et cetera, we not only do usability testing, but more and more we're doing Lego creative play and co-creation and really trying to get at underlying deeper needs and emotions. And when you ask people what prosperity means to them, it actually doesn't have anything to do with material objects and the number of zeros in your bank account. It has to do with the people you care about, the relationships that matter, and the moments in life you want to be prepared for. Like, this is actually the future of banking. It's not about getting financial literacy around how ISAs and short-term mortgages work. It's about being prepared for life. So we've actually started modeling out this thing called life, which sounds a bit nuts, but that's what money is meant to enable. So how many of you are working under customer journey frameworks of some kind, end-to-end customer journeys? Some of you guys? Yeah, so this is becoming more common, where there's 40 of them that we're working on. But a customer journey is only an economic product relationship. It doesn't speak to the deeper needs that product is about. So I'm in this journey right now. I'm in this life moment right now, where my 18-year-old in China, I'm like, he's got to pay his first bill. Like, did I teach him how to manage money? He doesn't even have a credit card. Like, I have all this anxiety around it. Like, I've never had any conversation with any banking institution about this, but wouldn't that help make this notion of design in banking more tangible? Now, in order to bring to life these stories, like our previous speaker talked about, we decided to build a 23-person storytelling team. This is a sampling of their work over the past couple of months, with documentary filmmakers, storyboard artists, animators, screenwriters, the guy who came up with See It, Say It, Sorted, and try to bring together a human narrative. So we created a graphic novel, was one of our projects. And this is what would banking be like if it was much more human. So we took aspects of our roadmap and just brought it to life. And it was really powerful because there were things on our technical roadmap like deploy real-time notifications on iOS and Android by Q2, which has like no soul, to like, well, how do we help this family manage spending on the go? And it just gave it more of this kind of human character, which was pretty powerful. And then it started getting us thinking about metaphor. We actually started with this aquarium idea. Like, what if you teach about healthy finances in school using some metaphor? What if our branches of the future were not only coffee shops and startup co-working spaces, but imagine, a grandma and a granddaughter, multi-generational relationships, talking about how the finances work. And it was around this time that I went to Edinburgh. So I went to this amazing building called The Mound. And in the Mounds, there's these archives around the original documents associated with the Bank of Scotland and Halifax and Scottish widows. And the archivist walked us through, and there were hundreds and hundreds of these things. Do you guys know what these things are called? Anybody? Ledgers. Are you in banking? No, you're just brilliant. Amazing. So ledgers, I didn't know about this thing called the ledger. This is how banking works. And I was like, where did that come from? Because we still use that language today. And it turns out the ledger came from the church, because paper in the 1400s was really expensive. And the church figured out, well, instead of using a sheet of paper for every transaction, which is what banking was doing, they just used a row for a transaction, whether it was a donation or attendance. And so it was brilliant. Long before databases and data science was here, this was a searchable, date-oriented kind of way of understanding information. Some banker, some Sunday, looked over at that thing, was like, hashtag FinTech Innovation 1400s. Like, that is cool. I'm going to try that out. And within 150 years, all of banking had switched over to using the ledger system. And when I look at what we're doing today in banking, it just feels to me like we're digitizing the ledger. Like 470 years is enough for one metaphor. And one of the things that we're doing is looking at, look at tech, right? This was the first metaphor for how human beings connected with computers, long before you guys are typing on your laptops. You had to, program punch cards from jacquard weaving looms from the 1800s. And then we had this era as typewriters became digitized, we had command line interfaces. And I don't know if you guys know this story, but you should check it out. Tim Motts at Xerox PARC in 1974. He brought in people into Xerox PARC who weren't experts in computers and said, well, how do you want to use technology? And after one session with this woman who was saying, well, I just wish computing was like working in the office where there's like a desktop and paper and files and I can just kind of copy and paste. And so that day at lunch in Palo Alto, I don't know what restaurant it was. I've been there for 10 years. I still want to figure out where that was. But he wrote down this idea. This is his own recreation of the napkin sketch moment, of the office schematic, of a desktop and a file cabinet and a waste bin. And the Xerox PARC team prototyped this in the Alto computer. And when Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak walked by as they were exploring their, getting inspiration for the next thing, some say they borrowed, others say they stole this interface. And this was the signature metaphor for, what they did with the Mac. And this was when adoption of personal computing took off. So we have yet to discover that moment in banking. And the team is looking for that. So I'm going to end up just with, I think we found our metaphor. I can't show you too much tangible stuff around it because we're still covering some IP, but I'll tell you the direction we're heading. And it actually has to do with connecting people to the future. But first, let me show you how disconnected people are from their future.
Anything can happen at any time. So I don't plan too far into the future. Then when we're talking long-term, property and stuff, I think it's in the back of my mind, but again, especially living in London, you have to be realistic. I'm kind of happy where I'm at because I know, I'm not going to be at this point forever.
I live for today and never mind tomorrow.
Yeah. And what about longer term stuff?
No, don't plan for really nothing.
About things like pensions or...
Yeah, no. No. I should be better at that.
Okay.
I will start looking into it
Yeah.
at some point. But yeah, well, it's one. I did have a look at my state pension forecast the other day, and apparently I don't get it until I'm 68. So that's 37 years, which is that's depressing.
So when you think about the ledger, it's this metaphor that only deals with the past, right? If you go into your banking apps today, the first thing you see are pending charges and then recent charges, and then you can go back and look at statements. And there's nothing you can change about that. It's all the past. Now we're starting to see the beginnings of interfaces that are guiding us around the future, but often it's the very distant future where it's like retirement calculators and things. So we're starting to think about the near future, like later today or tomorrow or sometime this week. And we've actually gone into our branches. You can see we've kind of created this studio-like culture where we're interacting with customers. The question on the right is a really fantastic one. We have customers fill this out to say, my customers feel like or are like, and we're getting incredible metaphors. We even did this with the top 200 execs at the bank who we're not designing for, but it was really interesting. We had them sketch on napkins. This is all of them. And so essentially, I just wanted to end by saying that. We're just at the beginning of this process, but the metaphor is a journey that gives a lot of room for interpretation of how to visualize. But it's about how do I get from here, the present, to the future that I want, with better financial connection, better financial health, maybe even more income generating possibilities. And the way I like to think about a journey is, does anyone here remember the days of driving where you had a big thick road atlas in the back of the car. Anyone remember that? That's how I learned how to drive. And I remember my dad teaching me, well, there's this grid system, and you go to B2, and then, here's the interstate symbols. And I remember, it was so confusing that you had, this guy is pulled over at the side of the road, right, to figure out, holy shit, what do I do, right? And then there was this brilliant moment with the rise of tech and with MapQuest, and this is a AAA triptych, where you got point-to-point, turn-by-turn directions. Do you guys remember these moments where you're like, oh my God, I can't tell you how exciting it is to print out this MapQuest thing, and then hopefully you had a navigator in the seat next to you that would be looking and oh, you've driven 0.8 miles, and okay, now you're about to turn. And this was brilliant, but God forbid you take a left when you're supposed to take a right, because this plan is no longer relevant. So then there was this other moment when you had GPS with rerouting. I mean, how powerful was that? You're never lost. You can go anywhere you want, and I'll always give you guidance. We experience these in our lifetime. And what we're trying to do is figure out how to create this experience at the heart of banking. So this story is not yet finished. We're just at the beginning. And for all of those who are really in unfriendly territories, like banking and engineering cultures who raise their hand, I'm so excited you're at where you're at, because that's exactly where you're going to grow the most. For those of you who raise your hands and you're a little bit more in that kind of intuitive, right-brained, I get you designers kind of space, you can get out of that space with one simple rule. Well, first of all, this is me and the CTO of Lloyds Banking Group, where we're actually, I love this picture because it's showing how we're switching perspectives and taking on new views. But there's this great book called Creative Confidence, which is kind of a manual about how to get uncomfortable in a creative way, to reclaim our innate creativity. Now, the way I do it is 3 times a week I go to Covent Garden. How many of you guys live in London? Yeah, you guys know Covent Garden? There's this cool little place called Pineapple Studios, which is like a dance studio. And I go there because that's a place where I don't belong. It's a 45-year-old, American white, banker. And I go there because that's where I feel most uncomfortable. And it was horrible the first couple of times because I was so conscious about what other people thought about me. And then as soon as I let go of caring about what other people thought and just was in it, this is like the highlight of my week. So I encourage all of you to find your way to do it. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 6 to 7 o'clock. I'm actually sacrificing my hip hop for you guys. Shows how much I love you guys. But there's all kind of ways to get into that zone. And in fact, I don't know if Martin's in this one, but we actually brought in the hip hop instructor to my leadership team. And you can see how awesome it is to get a bunch of designer bankers into their ikigai. It's pretty amazing. So thank you so much. I hope you all find space to pioneer design. Thank you.